Yeah, so thank you very much. I'm going to go from small undergraduate program all the way up to the institutional level. So I'm a faculty member in the Department of Statistics. I worked for quite a long time in survey statistics. And now I'm playing the role of Vice President for Research in one of those dreaded administrator jobs that you thought you would never take. And it's actually really fun, but it causes me to think about statistics in the context of, in a much broader context. And I want to just begin by reminding us what we talked about yesterday, is that statisticians are bringing expertise in design as well as in the expression of uncertainty through inference. And it's happening at multiple levels, at the study design, at the measurement level, and when you do your analysis and inference. We're also called upon to translate and clarify the meaning of what we're doing in our audience's language. So it's important for us to be effective in our communication. We heard from our agencies that good science requires good process controls. Actually, we heard that from the companies as well. It requires ethical thinking and it requires transparency. And these are all things that we need to do in partnership with the scientists that we work with. And we heard a plea from Chiton that we really need principles and systematic approaches for the data lifecycle. And that's really the thing that I want to focus on today, is really conceptualizing data from data collection to preservation. So one of the things that is happening with the emergence of the internet and digital materials is there's just been a continuous evolution towards more openly conducted science. And I think one of the potential hamartias in this move is our understanding of data and whether researchers or scholars or the public really understand what data are. Let me just talk a little bit about what open science means, at least the part that really excites me. I think this is just such cool stuff because it really is opening up a lot of opportunities. And there's really an excellent report on science as an open enterprise that was put together by the Royal Society a few years ago, where they really conceptualized this from a philosophical level, and they ruled it down to what should various kinds of organizations be doing. And really the premise of inquiry, the way in which inquiry works, is not really changing. We share information, published information about theories, data of various kinds, our interpretation. We get together like we are today and exchange ideas, debate various information and so on. And that leads to a cycle of scrutiny and self-correction that helps to advance science. So that mechanism is really still in play. But what's changing is the practice of how we do inquiry. And so whereas we all used to have, well, most of us are old enough that we all had journals on our shelves, and we went to the library to see the ones that we weren't subscribing to, the centrality of the printed page is really not as important, and there's many other kinds of materials that are available for us to gain knowledge. There's a lot more emphasis on sharing data publicly. And Andrew talked a little bit about collaboration and the nature of collaboration and all of the things that large-scale data collection bring to us. It changes this idea that we are autonomous researchers, which is really a challenge in terms of culture in universities, and one that I find is an interesting uphill battle. But eventually we're going to get to the place where data may be a scholarly product, or at least I certainly hope so. And then the internet has really changed how we collaborate with one another and how the public wishes to engage, via citizen science or just being able to look at papers, which they are currently often unable to do. Open science is really conceptualized as not only open access to scholarly publications, which is really at least a big push on many major campuses, but also sharing of data. And data can't be just shared by posting it out there. And that's really, people seem to agree on that, but are we really ready to do that? And one of the things that really makes me a big fan of this report is that they emphasize that none of this can really advance science or help our engagement with the public unless we have very effective communication of the contents. And so what does that mean for data? Well, first of all, the data have to be documented in a way that people can understand what's there. And, you know, what is the purpose of the study? Under what context were data collected? Methodology, etc. It might include computing approaches and so on. There has to be enough information that you can actually decide whether you think that this data set is of sufficient quality for whatever purpose you want to use it for, or whether the data producers really knew what they were doing. How many times as statisticians we've reviewed papers and we've gone, oh my God. And so you need to have enough information that anybody can do that with shared information. And then it needs to be usable. Somebody needs to be able to take the information and use it in there for whatever purpose. Besides the excitement of moving to a different scientific interaction paradigm, if you will, there's a lot of other things going on that, at least in the US, and I think in the UK, in the way this report was generated, that are driving the need to share. And one of them is the increased interest by the public to really evaluate scientific information and come to their own conclusions, good or bad. We certainly, through our Congress, have had a lot of pressure on our funding agencies to demonstrate accountability. And, you know, they're pushing out money to us as researchers, and they would like to see what are the products from that. There's also a hope that by putting data out there will increase our trust with the public. That certainly there is a possibility for new discoveries as we have the ability to bring different kinds of data sets together. And always, in at least Congress's mind, can we increase business activities? Can we increase our economy? So we need to adapt to this technological environment, but also acknowledge the social and political environment that is around this. So how is that getting manifested here for those of us who rely on federal funding for research? Well, a few years ago, the Office of Science and Technology Policy, actually using the Royal Society report as a backdrop, put together a memo to funding agencies to ensure that publications and data from research were shared. And they did it in a reasonable way, in the sense that they said, okay, but you first need to think about what shouldn't be shared. Is there information that's confidential or subject to privacy? Is it proprietary? Would it compromise our national security? He also asked us to balance the value of sharing information with the burden and cost of sharing information. And my favorite is, they said you can enable costs to be covered in grants. I'm not sure that we're seeing that entirely yet. And so they set the stage, and they really called upon all the agencies to put something in place, and it's rather an interesting mess right now in terms of how the agencies have responded. But the part about this process that really is something where I think statisticians can help, and you can do this through your programs, either consulting or education, is to really think a little bit more about data sharing practice. So currently, a lot of sharing, I mean, there's some disciplines that actually, by disciplinary practice, share information immediately before publications and so on, and they are very organized and they're really good models to look at. But a lot of sharing occurs in a very local, individualized situation where you can communicate one-on-one. And as a VPR, I'm looking at all the different disciplines in my institution and their understanding of data and how to care for it, or even how to document or plan for it. And it really varies greatly. The agencies are developing things, but it's really, as I said, it's kind of a mess right now, and it's not as helpful as we need. So we don't really have a guide to provide to researchers saying the agencies are going to want you to do X. And I find it very interesting that even though the preamble to the memo for OSTP emphasizes sharing information and all of the possibilities with reuse and so on, basically what they are emphasizing is you can put a data set up with a publication. So they really haven't gone all the way, and the narratives I hear when I talk to them are really that I think they're a little stymied by this as well. So here are some things that I think our researchers are going to face, and they're not unlike what you would, the questions you would ask when you are doing consulting in statistics. So the first one starts with, why are we sharing? And with whom? And what is the value of sharing? And that's actually a very challenging discussion. If a publication is a fairly discrete thing, it's pretty clear that you have a data set that you're analyzing, at least in most disciplines. Sometimes that's not so clear. But if you're going to post data so they can be used in the future for some unknown purpose, that's a wholly different thing. If you're going to support the movement to study reproducibility, which is actually very challenging, you might need a rawer form than you would for a publication. So people really need to think through this a little bit. Are you sharing to scholars or are you sharing to the public? How you write about things really depends on who you're sharing with. And then the whole question of value is an entire debate we need to have. This is really not clear, and if we're going to make data a scholarly product, we are going to have to understand what that means. It probably isn't going to be number of downloads of a data set. That doesn't really demonstrate impact. So then with the purpose, then you should have some understanding of what data should be shared. But it's hard to just say I'm going to share these data without understanding that purpose. I'm also, some of the social sciences at my institution don't always understand what kind of data they have, and that there are data that need to be protected, and how do you protect it? So they might know that data need to be protected, but their way of protecting it is never share. But there's lots of options. Or they may not be aware that, gee, if you have these sets of variables, even though you don't have the identifier, you can find out who this is. And so some education in what does it mean to, what are the kinds of risks that exist in data, whether it is human data, which is what I've been talking about, or other kinds of information, it would be very beneficial. Also, methodology in estimating the risk of disclosure, or at least getting some handle on this, would be very beneficial. And then there are a whole host of methods. The idea of sharing tends to be binary. If we can't share, then we don't share. But there are a whole host of methods, both in computer science and in statistics, that can be used to share information partially or in modeled form, or through some kind of a application process behind a secure firewall. And so helping researchers and the students that you're educating to understand that would be very good. There's been a lot of discussion about communication, and there's actually there's fields of information science that have thought quite a bit about how do we document data, at least in the data set itself. The federal statistical system has thought about this a little bit more broadly in terms of also sharing the context around the data. So we need to really think through the metadata that we're going to need in order for data to be transparent and usable and something that you can evaluate for quality. And all of that begs early planning. And I think the bane of all of our existence is the person who shows up at your door and wants your help. And they've already collected their data, and they've done all kinds of things to make it hard to get any information out of the data. And I really think, actually, this whole push to share data can really lead to improved science. If you have to share data, you have to think about sharing that data early on. And here's a fantastic opportunity to really think about design proactively. The other questions I have here are things that I'm worrying about. We don't have a repository for sharing data. We rely on disciplinary repositories, journal and agency repositories, and we're probably going to have to stand something up for all of the space that exists that doesn't have a repository that already exists. And there are a number of tools that are actually responding to the need for proactive data planning that are coming up that we're taking a look at in terms of how can we help our researchers with something that steps them through the process of thinking about their data. So that's my pitch. It's rather unusual for a statistics department to think about that, but I think that we bring a lot that was actually summarized in the first slide here, that we can really help advance this part of the open science world through our educational and our consulting practices. So thank you very much.